there were so many very fundamental pieces in myself that were being worked with, so many. And as those got worked with, the space within myself to hold all kinds of contradictions kept growing. And so it was possible to have this one aspect of my life that was in great despair, and also to be able to continue to hold sacred space for the people I was supporting. I think having that recognition has been really helpful for me. It translates into how I see my clients, that they could be going through something that is terrible and hard, but it also doesn't take away the possibility that they could also be doing something amazing in the rest of their life. Yeah, and that the two can coexist. And I think also for myself, that reminder, even if I'm going through something really hard, as long as I continue to receive support with that, as long as I am also doing my work around it, it doesn't have to compromise what I'm able to offer in the space I share.
Welcome to the Space Holders Medicine Podcast. We're your hosts, Malvina and Stephanie. This podcast is a sanctuary for space holders to delve into the unique medicine they offer. Each episode will explore their personal journeys, diverse modalities, and the profound experiences that inspire and shape their work. Join us as we uncover the transformative power of their craft. Enjoy! Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Space Holders Medicine Podcast. My name is Malvina, and I'm here with my co-host, Stephanie. And we are delighted to have a very special guest today, Diana, who is the founder of the Elemental Practice, offering body-based practices rooted in the wisdom of nature to help people restore their capacity to choose and live full, authentic lives. As a trauma-informed, body-oriented coach, somatic therapist, and embodiment facilitator, she supports people to bridge body and mind, befriend their emotions, and alchemize challenging experiences, past or present. She draws from decades of embodied experience and training in the therapeutic, meditative, and movement arts to offer intuitive and grounded space in listening presence, somatic therapy, and coaching sessions, along with song circles that bring community together with music. She especially enjoys supporting highly sensitive people, those who want to reconnect to their authentic expression, and anyone moving through periods of loss and transition. Ooh, okay, thank you so much, Diana, for being with us. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. That was a long intro. Sorry.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Okay, so Diana, just to start us off, could you share a little bit about your journey and what led you to create the elemental practice?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think growing up, as a highly sensitive person, just always found that I needed ways to soothe my system. And I found that the mediums of movement through yoga, through dance, through song have always helped to bring that for me, more so than more verbal, wordy practices could. So since I was young, I think I came across yoga when I was 13. I picked up a book and just sort of explored it from there and found so much comfort and ease from the asanas, but also from the meditations. And dance has also been such a big part of my world, all kinds like pole and hip hop and contemporary and the works. And it's such a wonderful, freeing expression of my body for me. And song as well has been part of my journey from the get go. So I think all these ways of connecting with the body have always felt very close to my heart. So to be offering more somatic based work right now feels quite natural. But I also think that I've had two sort of main influences in my life that have really led to what I share and how I share what I do. I think the first has been being part of a really beautiful Sangha community, a community that was started by one of my friends, Amber Sawyer. And for the 7 years that we were in the Sangha together, it was a really intensive but transformative time of being together in active meditation. So using breath, using sound, using movement, really allowing for emotional expression as a way to come into stillness. And I think to be able to feel so free to express all these aspects of self around other people has really shaped how I relate to my own emotions, my expression, and also how I relate to those of the people I hold space for. So that's been a really big part of it. Um, I would say that the other aspect would be just all the beautiful space holders who have helped me. Somatic therapy has really been one of the more like transformative ways that I have been met and I have grown. I've been really lucky to be held by space holders who are really full of grace and integrity and spaciousness and compassion. And that has really informed how I like to share as well. I think before I tried to explore talk therapy, but I'm very analytical and I'm also quite intuitive. So I tend to preempt what the other person is asking, where they're coming from. And it can become a bit of a very heady exercise. And in contrast, I just found that with somatic therapy, it kind of cut into what was there. It was something I couldn't sort of bluff my way around. And I think it's that honesty that I really appreciate about somatic therapy and why it's what I offer at the moment.
Thank you so much. And I resonate a lot with knowing, preempting where your talk therapist is coming from, and then also knowing the right answers
Yes.
to say, to
And
please them.
wanting to give the right answers as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I love your brand name of the elemental practice. I wonder if you could share a little bit about how it came about and how has the meaning deepened for you over time.
Yeah, I'm still discovering what the meaning of the elemental practice is. Uh, in some ways, I'm very guided by my intuition. And there was one morning I woke up and I just had the elemental practice phrase in my head. And I knew that it would be the name of the business that I founded. But at the time, I was a little bit doubtful about the name, honestly, because it sounded a bit like a law firm or some kind of a copywriting company. I was like, I don't really know that that's a good name, but it stuck. It kept staying with me. And so I've just continued to lean into the trust around it. And at the beginning, I took it very literally because my work's really influenced by Chinese medicine. And I just assumed the elemental part of it referred to the five elements. And I think that component of it is still very much relevant to the way in which I share my work. But over time, I think elemental for me has come to take on a much more, I don't know whether it's basic or much more overarching meaning of something that's really essential, something that's really foundational. It's elemental. And I feel that is very much the kind of work that I enjoy helping people with, right? Where we are in the process of connecting back to what makes us essentially human, in all of our expression, in all of our needs, in all of our ways of relating. And it's that essential quality I think that I've begun to appreciate over time with this name for the elemental part of it. And I think with the practice part of it, it's for me very personally helpful to have that in the name because it's not always easy for me to be in a space of continuing regular, consistent practice. So it's a reminder for me to do that. But I think in the case of what it means for my work at the moment. I often talk to clients a lot about the idea of how we are a constellation of patterns. We're a bunch of patterns that we keep either deepening or unlearning. And to do either of them, we practice. We either practice unconsciously the patterns that aren't helpful, or we get to consciously choose to practice the new patterns so that we can transform. So that what practice for me holds that meaning now as well. Yeah.
That's amazing, Diana. Thank you so much for sharing. It feels like there's so much depth and layers that you have experienced from a personal level as well as someone who's a space holder. So We'd really love to know, what does space holding mean to you, and how does your understanding of it, how has it evolved over the years through your experience?
Mm, yeah. I guess I think a lot with space holding about how I want to be held, and also more fundamentally, how we all kind of want to be held and met. Like, I think we all want to be seen and heard and allowed and received and to belong. And I think for me, how my space holding has changed over time is that it's become a lot more about myself being an instrument and having a lot less to do with any techniques or any clever things to say or being able to make sense of what's there, but really how much can I get out of the way so that what comes through in the space is something that is guided for the both of us. And it means that I work in a much more organic way than maybe how I started, and also where there is less of a need for something to happen because I am leaning into the trust of what will happen anyway, even if it's beyond what is visible on the surface. I think for me, space holding has like three components, which I find really essential. Like the first is that of deeply listening. And so for me, when I'm in a session, like I'm always listening to myself, like what's happening in my body. Have I begun to lean out and try to do too much? And can I bring myself back? It's about listening to what's happening in the field, in the space between me and the client. You know, is there ease? Is there tension? Has something come up that is unspoken? But it's also about listening to what's happening for the client. And because I'm clairsentient, I tend to feel a lot of what somebody else is feeling, whether it's their emotions, sensations, or also their nervous system state. And I think being able to be in a space, I think on the receiving end for a client, can really bring a sense of being very much heard, whether it's outwardly spoken or not. And I also feel like that deep listening translates into the verbal space as well. You know, I think we're far more wise and intelligent and aware of what we actually, for example, want or don't want. It's just a question of how much we're able to listen to that ourselves. And I find that sometimes when I'm listening to a client say something, it's so clear that in the energy behind their words, there are some things that are really true for them, and there are other things that are being said maybe because out of conditioning or out of habit. And sometimes in that listening deeply and reflecting back those words of their own truth, that can be so powerful, I think, to receive, but it's really their truth that they're hearing, not that it's coming from me. And another aspect of that deep listening for me is when I'm working on the table with someone and just the levels of listening, right, to their body's yeses and nos, to the openings and the tightenings. And so much of that conversation is happening without necessarily needing to verbalize. So that for me is a big aspect of space holding, which helps someone to feel heard. Um, Another aspect would be the sense of allowing presence. And so when I'm encountering someone in the room, like I'm meeting them as they are in that moment, even though I might have seen this person over a period of time, but when I'm seeing them today, right now, I'm seeing them as where they're at right now. So with less of a history or less of a story about whatever they might be bringing in or however they might be showing up. And I think in the present, it's liminal, right? When we're in the present moment, anything is possible. And when someone can be received in presence, whatever needs to arise, whatever feels ready and ripe to be shared will arise. And there's something that can be trusted in that. And what I find that helps so much is that it takes pressure off needing to come in with like the thing to work with because it will arise anyway. So that's another component for me that's really important, that allowing presence. And maybe a third one for me would be this idea of clean relating. And it's taken a little while for me to get very, very clear about it. But I found that over time, and I've been in my supervision sessions with my supervisor, who I bring sometimes cases or situations that I find challenging for myself to, it's become so clear that every time a session lingers with me, or every time I find myself taken off center in a session, it's me. It's entirely me. Yeah, there's something in me that has been triggered, something in me that's unprocessed that the situation or the dynamic has brought up. And what that means for me is that every single client is a mirror. And anything that I'm finding hard to hold is more reflection of something that I need to look at. And I think that level of self accountability makes for a very clean, healthy relating space in sessions, because I'm not blaming anything that happens in session. I'm not trying to control anything, because I am an equal to the person who's sitting opposite me. And what it also means is that whatever I offer in sessions is really invitational. So I'm not very hung up whether someone wants to follow my suggestion or not, because I also trust that there's something there on the other person's end that they know themselves better. Yeah, so those three I would say are the important components for me with space holding. Yeah.
Thank you, Diana. The idea of like these three tenets of space holding for you, deep listening and presence and clean relating. What I'm hearing is that it really holds each of your clients in their power for them to navigate and also to be in charge of or to lead the way of their own healing journey with you. And it feels like you are walking alongside them as opposed to imposing your ideas or what you feel is the right thing to do onto them.
Yeah, I love that reflection. I feel that that very much is central to what I would ideally like to offer, where someone retains their sense of agency from start to end, even from the contracting process to someone choosing to leave when they feel complete. At every point in time, the client remains in their agency, in their power, and we are constantly in a process of co-creating what happens in a session. Yeah.
Yeah, I think of it also as being a co-explorer, an equal explorer
Um,
alongside the client of their inner world. Um, just now you said something about how when you are receiving somatic therapy, it's like you can no longer deny what's present within the inner space. I wonder if you could share about your experience as a practitioner or also as a client about how somatic therapy has shaped or influenced your understanding of the body's intelligence and emotions and its role in healing.
oh, yeah. Mm. I think there are two aspects of me. Like, there's a part of me that's very analytical, very mind-based, and there's another part of me that is so out there and intuitive. Like, both are aspects of me. And what I love is that, for me at least, somatic therapy is not about denying the intelligence of the mind, but it's really about bridging the mind and the body. And I find that the body is the space that can hold the logic, and it can also hold the expanse of possibility and intuition. And I think that's what I've really come to appreciate about receiving work this way, where sometimes in session there is a need for me to just trust and follow the sensations that are moving through me without without having the very comforting narrative to lean into. This is happening because of this is because of that. But how much am I able to lean into the mystery within my own body, right? Which is really a microcosm of the larger mystery of life, of nature. And and I think being able to learn to follow without always having answers immediately, for me, has also shaped how I experience life, right? That there might not always be answers immediately. And can I still lean into following, trusting, listening nonetheless, knowing that at some point, sometimes the answers will reveal in their own timing. I think another aspect as well, when I think about my own receiving of somatic therapy, I think it's been kind of recognizing and learning how much our body tries to do for us, really out of protection. I think I've really come from where I began, and I've always seen my body as an ally, but I'm so staunchly behind that right now, not just in my body, but everybody that I encounter. Um, I think in my own digesting of challenging experiences, I've been surprised at the many things that seemed like split seconds of something happening. But but when I began to go into it a little deeper, I realized how much was happening in that moment, how much my body was trying to assist me, help me make a decision, help me run away, help me respond. That landed up, for example, maybe getting stuck in my body. And when I come to see those micro moments stretched out and explored within a session, I think I'm just really left in such a space of awe at what our body knows, that our mind sometimes can only begin to catch up with many, many months, years later. So I think it's that awe of the body that I've also come to really appreciate in receiving somatic therapy sessions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Diana. That's really, really powerful, what you've shared. Speaking of which, previously you've also shared some insights about how much the body holds grief and trauma. Could you speak a little bit more about your own personal journey through grief and how it has influenced your work and your approach to somatic therapy?
Mm. Yeah. I think I was sharing kind of before we began today that, ooh, this is feeling a little bit tender for me. I think up till now, I've not really publicly shared very much about my own grief journey that has been taking place over the last 2.5 years. And I mean, I've chosen to have it be quite private. And at the same time, this invitation here to speak feels really precious because I feel so strongly of how grief doesn't get enough airtime. It's such a misunderstood process. And also, it shaped me so much. It continues to shape me, will continue to shape me as a space holder. So, yeah, I'm really happy to share about that. So my partner died 2.5 years ago, and it was very difficult and very painful. And I think in the lead up to their death, it was very quick. And so I feel like grief for me has been maybe the hardest experience. This loss has been the hardest experience of my life. And I've been through quite a lot in my life already at this point, and also had so many tools in my toolkit, and none of them really worked so well. So it's been very humbling. And for me, certainly, it's been an initiation. I know there are people who really recoil at this phrase of the idea of grief as an initiation or a portal. And I think everyone gets to make their own sense out of what grief is for them. But for me, it's certainly been that way. I feel like because grief, when allowed, touches into such core primal places on the inside, when you journey with it, it can only expand you. And I don't think I've ever met these places inside me that are so absolutely at the pit of despair and helplessness as I have. But I've also never met the spaces of surrender and trust and faith in the way that I have since all of this has unfolded. And it's like an ongoing journey, mystery for me, and an ongoing teacher. And I think one of the things that really surprised me in my grief journey was exactly like what you were just sharing, right? The idea of the body holding so much. And I sense my body pretty well, like to begin with, but I think I really came to taste firsthand the way in which challenging experiences, loss, trauma can really show up psychosomatically. And I I've never experienced anything quite so acute in my life. And I also know that why this grief showed up in the way it did in my body, even though I've had previous losses and deaths in my life, is because of the depth to which this relationship meant to me, because of how deeply in my heart my partner occupied and occupies a space. And I think for me, one of the ways that really showed up was, I think for 2 years and a bit, it's actually only been recently that it stopped, which I'm so glad for. But for 2 years and a bit, every time I would kind of walk around the neighborhood on this route that I used to take with my partner. My partner's a creature of habit. So we'd go down the same route. And every time I walk that route, I'd hit a point where my legs would just go numb and I would just collapse. Like I just come to my knees and I wouldn't be able to stand. And I'm a pretty grounded person. Like that's a very unusual experience for me. And I would just need to try and massage my legs and try to hold on to a railing to be able to get up. And at first that was obviously really scary and terrifying. But then I also noticed that when I crossed the road, which is where my partner and I never used to walk along that particular stretch, all the feeling would come back into my legs. So from one moment collapsed and the next moment it would begin to revitalize. I began to recognize that my body in its deep grief was remembering every time I walked that path. And when I just crossed the road, it would shift and it would slowly return back to the here and now. And I think another thing that I experienced was for a whole year and a bit after my partner died, like I couldn't read anything. And I'm a pretty avid reader. And I would look at text on a page and I could see the words that I could understand because they're all in English, but I wouldn't be able to string them together as a sentence. It'd just be like a bunch of jumbled words for me. And that lasted for, yeah, a year and a half. And after a while, it came back. And I think having experienced these things within myself that people couldn't explain, right? Because otherwise, I seem generally fine. I've just come to a much deeper space of empathy for clients who show up presenting all kinds of strange symptoms. And I believe them. And I also really trust that there's a deeper intelligence underneath those expressions, and that those expressions aren't needing to be fixed, but they're needing to be in conversation with. Like there's something underneath that's really wanting to be met and supported that didn't get the support it needed. So that has really deepened for me the way in which I regard all these ways the body can show up when it's out of balance, out of sync. And I think another aspect, and I think maybe really relevant for this conversation around space holders, is this idea, that as a space holder, I need to have all my stuff going okay, and then I can show up and I can hold this wonderful space. And what happened for me was out of necessity. I needed to start working quite soon after my partner died. And it was weird because there was one whole aspect of my life that was in complete disarray. Like the person I was going to spend my life with, the person who was my rock, my first safe person in life disappeared. And then at the same time, I was having sessions with clients who were bringing in sometimes really heavy things. And somehow those sessions seemed to go okay. And they still felt safe. They were still transformative. And I remembered at the time really questioning myself, am I in a space? Can I hold this space right now? And I would keep checking in with myself at the end of the day. And I'm like, actually, I'm feeling fine. Okay. Am I in denial? Is there something here I'm not seeing? Am I distracting myself? But after a while, I think I came to recognize that because I was maybe receiving so much somatic therapy in my anticipatory grief while my partner was still alive, and also after my partner died, there were so many very fundamental pieces in myself that were being worked with, so many. And as those got worked with, the space within myself to hold all kinds of contradictions kept growing. And so it was possible to have this one aspect of my life that was in great despair, and also to be able to continue to hold sacred space for the people I was supporting. I think having that recognition has been really helpful for me. It translates into how I see my clients, that they could be going through something that is terrible and hard, but it also doesn't take away the possibility that they could also be doing something amazing in the rest of their life. Yeah, and that the two can coexist. And I think also for myself, that reminder, even if I'm going through something really hard, as long as I continue to receive support with that, as long as I am also doing my work around it, it doesn't have to compromise what I'm able to offer in the space I share. Um, yeah. And I think maybe another aspect of it is also, I think the nature of grief is something that is so untamed. It's so wild. It's so impolite. you know, it just shows up whenever it shows up. It is intense whenever it is intense. And I feel like that learning how to honor the way that grief shows up, learning to also recognize that a singular loss, a singular grief is very rarely a singular grief if that grief or loss is deep enough. I think in my own case, the loss of my partner touched all the way back into my birth trauma, and that's partly why it's been such deep work in navigating my grief journey since. And what that translates to when I think about the clients that I see is that they might feel like they're stuck in their grief, or they're finding a certain loss or transition so hard, but very many times it's because it's not that thing alone. It's everything that's been touched into, however far back, we don't know. It might be all the way back to something that's intergenerational, like that sense of loss that they're encountering. And of course it would take time. And of course it might feel like the grief keeps returning again and again and again, and it doesn't seem to shift. But I don't think it is the same thing that's coming up again and again, even though the form of it looks similar. Yeah, but there are always different layers that are emerging. And it's almost like the image that comes for me is like a hot spring from the ground, and what's happened is there is a space that has been made at the surface through this one loss. But actually, what's emerging, it's coming from like the deepest groundwater, and it's emerging up. And all of that emotion is really just needing space to be expressed and to be felt and to be witnessed and to be held. And so when I encounter clients who maybe feel really stuck in their grief, I think I hold a lot of patience and a lot of compassion for that. Also knowing that there's just probably a whole lot that they're digesting because they are willing to journey with their grief in this moment. And I know that the more willing someone is to be with their grief, what a potent alchemizer grief is to all our layers through so many stories. So yeah, it's really shaped that for me.
Thank you so much, Diana, for sharing it. It's so tender, and I feel very moved and emotional listening to you share your journey. Something that struck deeply in me was when you spoke about how from grief you eventually land on faith and trust and surrender in this journey. I wonder if you could speak a bit more about that, and how did your relationship with trust and surrender in the recovery, or in it, I don't want to say recovery, but just in the journeying alongside grief show up, and how did it support you? How did you come to trust or surrender to surrender?
It's true. It is very tender, huh? All of this conversation. And I actually feel so grateful that I'm getting to speak about it here with both of you. Yeah, it feels like I feel really received in this space in my tenderness. Um, I think the irony for me is that for the greater part of my life, I was always holding that question. How can I trust more? How can I surrender more? And it's like trying all these ways, like I'm going to trust, I'm going to surrender. And I think hmm, I think maybe just to start from a very basic level, I think what many people encounter with significant transition and loss, especially when that loss is permanent, is I think there is a choice that needs to be made of, am I going to keep here? Am I going to stay here? And I mean that on a like very literal level. I don't think kind of ideation is something that comes up for everybody, but when experiencing big loss, there can be a sense of, what am I living for? And I think fortunately for me, because I am so easily moved by beauty and I'm so easily moved by nature, that was really where I began my moments of trust. Yeah, in these really small ways, in these, glimmers, as Deb Dana likes to call them, right? And what it might look like initially when I first began on this journey was listening to the birds. The birds continue to lift my heart. And I have a big, beautiful tree outside the window, and different birds would come and visit. And I would hear them in the morning when they would awaken, and I just have the sense like, okay, another day is here, and the birds are here, and I'm here. And I think it's Asia Sula in her book, Mirrors of the Earth, where she speaks to how this idea of how the birds are uniquely singing for us, for each of us. When we hear their song and we go past them, they're singing for us, about us, to us. And I think that notion has really remained with me. And in the morning when I would lie in bed and I would hear these birds, I would think to myself, okay, the birds are singing to me here and letting me know a new day is here. And I took a lot of comfort in that. I took a lot of comfort in the sunlight that would stream into the room, very small things of noticing the beauty of what it was to still be alive amidst the devastation, and continuing to lean hard into beauty really supported me in that um, initial part of my journey. I think as well that it's almost like, because it felt like the the ground under me had just gone, you know, and for me to continue to move through one day to the next, that there was a need to find something to lean into. And the person I used to lean into wasn't there anymore. And so I also leaned very heavily into whether it's prayer, whether it's devotional practices and rituals, whether it was connecting into spirit, and also song, music. Music has also really sustained me in this time in a way that has always been important, but it's just taken on a whole other level of significance because, firstly, music was something I connected so deeply with my partner on. But secondly, because I think in music and in singing, there is again a dropping into this liminal space where you're just here. You're just here in this moment. And the song is starts off maybe coming from me, but after a while it's coming through me. And I think being able to feel filled and lifted and nourished from the sound flowing through me, and being able to feel filled through spirit flowing through me and the rituals and the prayers that really helped me, I feel, move in this direction of trusting into what is in the unseen and in the unknown. And I guess now I remember saying this to someone quite early on. It's funny now what is in the unseen has an aspect of it that I do know because my partner's on the other side. And I think, oh, that makes me kind of emotional. But I think that that makes this larger mystery feel so much closer to me. It feels so much more tangibly benevolent. And and I think in all of the interesting signs and synchronicities that have emerged after my partner's death, those are also ways in which I've come to appreciate that faith or that trust. It's we have a like the butterfly is one of our symbols, so is the bee, and just random butterflies show up in this house, like dead or alive or cocooning. Yeah, they've just been showing up, and also certain songs that randomly play the moment I enter into a restaurant or I enter somewhere, that songs that hold significance. And I think all of these ways help me to notice and lean into that trust in ways that I don't think I felt as connected to as I do now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Diana. I feel so much of the spectrum and the depth. Am I hearing an echo? Is there an echo? No. Okay. Um, yeah, thank you so much for that, Diana. I'm feeling so much of the full spectrum and depth of transformation that you allow yourself to experience through this whole process. I'm feeling the tenderness that you're sharing. And it's really interesting that you speak of music and song because my first kirtan experience was with you in a space, and I just felt like I was brought in such a sacred uh state by by experiencing that with you, and how medicinal it was for me as well, and being in an environment who were just kind of co-creating and co-expressing through the sacredness of music and song. And it is such a beautiful extension of your work. So we would love to know, how do you see group practices like these complementing your individual somatic sessions?
Yeah. I love that I popped your kirtan cherry. Uh, like music for me, I love, right? I've always loved, I love even more now. And I think for me, at a very personal level, it is so wonderful to be able to share time with people where we all get to sing together, because that makes me really happy. And that uplifts me and fills me. But yeah, I really do see the song circles as an extension of the one-to-one work that I offer, in which sound often shows up anyway. And and I think it's maybe because quite a few clients who come to see me are highly sensitive. They might be a bit more shy, a bit more introverted, or they might find it hard to express themselves, like to dare to use their voice, whether it's to express their truth, to express their needs. And to me, what better way to practice that expression than through the vehicle of song? I think song can feel a little safer because we have words. If someone chooses to follow the lyrics of a song, they don't need to come up with the words themselves. And if we're not using words, then we can make sounds, and sounds don't have words. So again, it takes some of the pressure of what to say, how can I say it off. And generally, whether or not it's a more mellow sort of song circle or something that's more uplifting, there's more of a sense of lightness and play that's present in song circles. And I think that environment of play, that where our nervous system is already feeling a bit more at ease, creates the perfect garden, if you will, for someone to begin to plant these seeds of trying out their voice and seeing how it feels like to express themselves with other people around. So it's a great platform, I find, for people to feel a little confident, a little bit more confident over time with expressing themselves, and to do so with other people around. When we sing together, there's all the research that points to all the ways we find a greater sense of resonance and belonging. And it's nice that you can do that in a song circle without feeling like you need to try too hard to make the small talk or to do something else, because we're united there, the common purpose anyway already. And just that ease of being able to be together with other people, our voices meeting in song, in the shared space, I think can be very nourishing, can help us feel less alone. So yeah, I am so glad to be sharing song circles again at the moment.
I've been to your song circle at your home, and it just felt so special in sharing voice together and in enjoying or being bathed in the music together as a group, as a community. When you spoke to this sense of belonging, and it's like, I don't know who this person is on my right or on my left, but in this moment, we are in connection together, and that's just so beautiful. And I wonder if you might have a story or something that you have observed in the power of sharing voice or sharing sound in creating these very intimate connections, and sense of belonging in group setting in your song circles. Or also you did soul soup, right? I wonder if it might speak to each other.
Yeah. Mm. So yeah, Soul Soup Sundays are an offering that I share with a really dear friend of mine. And while the form looks different, I think there's something around the intention of both that are similar to the song circles and Soul Soup Sunday, of giving people a safe space where they can try out their voice. Yeah, one more verbally, a bit more intellectual, and the other like much more organic and through the expression of sound. Um, I think with the song circles, I remember when I first began to offer them, again, after a long hiatus. I used to offer them like 10 years ago. And when I started to offer them again last year, what was so beautiful was that I had some of my clients, one of my one-to-one clients come, and I mean, and just to see their shift from being maybe a bit hesitant at the start of the circle to how they were feeling at the end, how they were using their voices, how they were expressing themselves, and even beyond the song circle, how they continue to find a little bit more trust in their own voice. For me, is so beautiful to see. It's so wonderful, and I think also to just see people strike up conversations, people who might not otherwise have had the chance to meet. But somehow there's something that's brought them there, maybe a love of music and having sat next to someone and sung together with them but not known their name and felt close already, I think can make for such a wonderful entryway into getting to know someone better. So that's what I've encountered in the song circles and in the Soul Soup Sunday sessions. Those are so beautiful. I'm so grateful that we're running them as well. Because the format is also very organic, like we don't pre-plan what we're going to say or certain questions and all of that. And each person just kind of layers onto what somebody else has said that they feel inspired by. At the end of every session, there's a sense that we've woven something together. We've taken the central theme and everybody there might not have known each other at the start of the session, but we leave feeling like we've all been in this process of weaving together our understanding, even if we might remain with different perspectives around something, but we've woven together a larger understanding around what matters to us. And we also have soup and Soul Soup Sunday. It's real soup. And after we speak and we sit and we gather and we have soup together, in that space, you also see lots of conversations and connections that happen really organically. And sometimes people who come to the circles are a bit more shy, and still there is space for that connection to happen because the weaving has already happened, because we're there communing, because the safety is there. So I feel like both of these are such beautiful avenues for community to be forged and to continue to deepen. Yeah.
Thank you, Diana. Yeah, there really is so much beauty and healing in being in such a safe community space, even if you're just there as your presence, right? Speaking of weaving a larger tapestry together, you mentioned that grief doesn't have as much airtime as it deserves. Do you have any plans to share about grief in your community?
Mm. So last year, last year I had hosted a grief circle with a friend. It was a 3-week journey. It was open to all forms of grief. And I felt at the time I very much wanted an in-person community to grieve with. A big part of what had been my support system in my anticipatory grief were these online grief circles, which I was participating in, but they were all based in the Pacific Northwest in the US. And so their flora and their fauna and their seasons were completely different from where I was at. And I really wanted to land something here. And I was really glad that that went ahead the way it did. And maybe at some point there'll be a reprisal of that, but in a different form, because I feel like where I'm at in my grief journey now feels really different. Um, I think through that process, I also recognize that because grief as it is something we all know, actually. Yeah, whether or not it's grief around a relationship change or grief around the environment and the planet and what's happening to her, or grief around a loss. We all know grief. It's such a broad topic that I feel like any offering I might put forward into the community in time to come would be a little bit more focused around the loss of a person. First, I mean, there's space for all those other kinds of grief, but I think it's almost too large a creature to try to meet. And and something that's really close to my heart, it's been brewing for some time, would be some kind of a companion guide for people who are grieving or people who are in the space of anticipatory grief. Um, Something that that would be self-directed, and they would be able to follow along in their own time, because time and schedules are really hard when you're grieving. They don't really make sense. But something that would offer comfort, that would offer a sense of being heard and understood, and some practical tools, to help someone through. I think that would be something very meaningful for me, as and when that that takes physical form. Yeah.
Thank you. And from now till then, is there any where that you might suggest people to maybe begin their, if they are looking for somewhere to go or someone to go to begin their journey with somatics or body-based practices, especially in transmuting and befriending these more intense emotions like grief? Do you have any text or anywhere that you recommend they begin?
I think there were a couple of books that I read so many books in grief, it's not funny. Or rather, I heard, because I couldn't read. I heard so many audiobooks in grief. But one book that I deeply love, continues to inform my approach, and I was reading before my partner died, is The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller. His work is profound. I think he refers to himself as a soul psychotherapist or a spiritual psychotherapist. And I love that he addresses the many, many ways that grief can show up in our lives, and how there's so much more to grief than just the grief around loss. Yeah. And he speaks about it in such a poetic and sensitive way. So I love his book. Another book that I really appreciate is by Megan Devine, It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And her book is much more to the point, quite direct, sometimes a bit blunt, but I also really appreciate it because it sort of named aloud a lot of things that I encountered in my own grief journey, of things that people say to you where they try to ease their discomfort around grief by saying things to you that actually aren't very helpful. And in her book, she really, I think, gives voice to those experiences, following her own journey with loss and grief. It's a great book. Um, Another book that I really appreciate is called Grieving Room. I'm trying to remember the author's name off the top of my head, but I can't. It's also a very beautiful book that speaks to the importance of there needing to be room for grief in so many ways. Like room for the messiness, room for the discomfort, room for the breakdowns, room for the anger, room for the time that it takes. And the author herself is a minister in her church, and in spite of her training and her experience of holding space for other people's grief, her own personal grief was incredibly hard to take in. And I love the honesty with which she writes the book. So that's another book I really recommend. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sienna. Ah, thank you so much for sharing so much of your wisdom
Mm.
and your vulnerabilities with us. We would love to ask you if there's any mantra or song that expresses the essence of space holding for you. And if you
Oh,
want to sing it for us.
I would love that. And I'm sure our listeners
wow.
would too.
Okay, let me have a little think.
Yeah, take your time.
A mantra or song that expresses how you feel with space holding.
Or something that maybe you share often in your song circles because it allows for everyone to feel held and embraced in community.
There's so many options. Uh, hmm. I've got all these songs swimming in my head for
All
the
at the same time.
community event on the 15th, and then also for the song circle coming up on Friday. So I'm like, oh, so
Perfect.
many options.
Sneak preview.
Um, hmm. So there's a song. It's not one that I've actually shared before. It's one that I will be sharing soon, and it's what's called, and I guess it's called by many names, but it's like called a melodic mantra. So something really simple and short and repetitive, and it was something that I wrote. Yeah, and it speaks to how the heart can hold these contradictions. And I feel like just from our conversation today and the themes and the topics that we've spoken to, I feel that that's really resonant for me right now. So I'll just sing it. Okay. So the song is called This Heart Can Hold. Mm. This heart can hold the bright and heavy. This heart can hold sweetness and sadness. This heart can hold more than I know. Follow your heart, let it show you the way. Follow your heart, let it show you the way. Follow your heart, let it show you the way. Follow your heart, let it show you the way.
Thank you so much. It's so
Mm.
beautiful and it feels like such a perfect close to our conversation or pause. Um, can you share more about your song circles, how our listeners can learn more about them, and also where they can find you and explore the work that you offer?
Sure. So the song circles, I have a couple of upcoming song circles, but they're pretty ad hoc. They're sort of based on when the inspiration strikes. And at the moment, I really like to share primarily with somebody else. I think there is a magic that comes in the weaving together. So they'll kind of be spaced out over the course of every couple of months, I'd say. And I always post about them on my Instagram page, which is the Elemental Practice. And if someone's interested to explore work with me as well, they can find me there on Instagram or also on my website, which is theelementalpractice.co. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Diana. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It has truly been so special to have you with us. So, so, so tender. I feel like most of the time, Steph and I were just receiving everything that you were sharing and feeling it. At least for me, I was feeling it in my body too. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. And thank you so much, Stephanie, for co-hosting with me. And thank you to all our listeners for listening and holding space for us. as you experience this episode, and we look forward to sitting with you on the next one.
Thank you.
Bye.